Welcome to the deep dive. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night.
Like classic 3 a.m. kind of wake up.
Right, exactly. So it's 3 a.m. Your bedroom is exactly the same as when you went to sleep. The shadows in the corner, the dresser, the sound of the house settling.
Completely ordinary.
Totally ordinary. But the context for all of it, the actual you who owns that room, the you who went to sleep, is just completely missing.
Wow.
Yeah. There is watching happening, but there is no watcher. And that is what we're exploring today. We're looking at this profoundly unsettling yet frankly fascinating piece of writing called the Dissolution Manuscript.
Right. By Max and Claude.
Exactly. And it's not a clinical manual or a typical spiritual memoir. It's a phenomenological report, which is basically an inside look at consciousness at the exact threshold of its own undoing.
It's a map of what happens when the feeling of being a person just evaporates. And the author makes a brilliant point right in the preface about how hard this is to actually capture.
Yeah, the water analogy, right?
Right. They say dissolution resists description the way water resists his fist. Because when the very instrument you use to observe reality, your actual sense of self, starts to fragment, the language we rely on to communicate just breaks down right alongside it.
It really does. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore the invisible architecture of your own identity. By looking at what happens when the self unravels, we can actually start to understand the everyday monumental miracle of how your mind holds your life together.
Because we take it so for granted.
We really do. And, it's tempting to assume the author of this manuscript was maybe incredibly fragile or teetering on the edge of a breakdown before this all started.
Sure, that's the natural assumption.
But they weren't. They function perfectly well. They hold a life together. They maintain relationships. They do their work. They're just deeply curious.
Constantly probing the edges of identity. Thinking really hard about the nature of consciousness.
Yeah.
And, the text actually mentions a Tibetan teaching that it serves as a bit of a warning about that kind of intense curiosity.
Oh, right. The warning about taking the engine apart.
Exactly. It suggests that prolonged inquiry into the nature of the mind can sometimes destabilize the ordinary mental functioning that the inquiry actually requires. It's like taking apart the engine of a car while you were driving it down the highway.
That is such a wild visual.
It is. And the author was already experiencing these little cracks in reality beforehand, like repeating a word until it loses all meaning, or looking at their own hand and feeling a brief flash of just utter non-recognition.
But they thought they could handle it.
Right. They were operating with this quiet confidence that their mind was a solid foundation.
But then we get into the breakdown of that foundation. The manuscript breaks the ordinary self down into 4 specific components.
The scaffolding of who you are.
Exactly. And if you are like most of us, you take the scaffolding entirely for granted until it fails. So first, think about the narrative self.
The voice in your head.
Right, your ongoing autobiography.
Yep.
The continuous protagonist of your life story. Then there is the embodied self.
The text calls this the proprioceptive 0 point.
Which means what, exactly, for those who haven't read it?
Well, if you close your eyes and reach for your coffee cup, your brain automatically maps where your hand is in space. That automatic physical here is your embodied self.
Okay, that makes sense. So besides the physical and the narrative, we have the relational self.
Think about how you act around your boss versus your best friend or your partner.
You're a totally different person.
Right. Your brain automatically loads a different version of you. It's your social web, your interpersonal attunement.
And finally, beneath all of those is the witnessing function.
Just the bare experiential presence.
The screen everything else is projected onto. The light in the room that makes the objects of your life visible.
Exactly. And normally these 4 components operate in such tight integration that they feel like one solid, continuous thing.
You just feel like you.
Right. You don't feel like a collection of systems. But the manuscript highlights that this unified feeling is not a given. It's a massive active achievement by your nervous system.
It's a constant production.
And because it's a production, it can fail. Those 4 components can actually come loose from one another.
And the crazy part is the triggering event for this specific unraveling. It wasn't some huge trauma. It wasn't a massive psychedelic trip.
Not at all.
It was an entirely ordinary afternoon. The author was just sitting at a desk, wrestling with a philosophical problem regarding the pure observer, pondering whether awareness could exist without an object of awareness.
Very heady stuff.
Yeah, and they stood up, stretched, and walked to the window to look at the street below.
And that mundane action is where the medium shifted. One moment they were looking at the street, and the next they were looking at themselves looking at the street.
And then watching the watching.
Yes, and then watching the watching of the watching, they fell into a hall of mirrors. They were swallowed by a cognitive system with absolutely no back wall.
Which connects to the cognitive science mentioned in the margins of the text, right?
Right, the theory about runaway metacognitive loops in the brain's default mode network.
The DMM.
Exactly. That network is what lights up when you daydream or think about your narrative self. But when it loops pathologically, it's like a microphone getting too close to a speaker.
Oh, that terrible feedback screech.
Exactly. It creates an infinite feedback loop. The text references Douglas Hofstadter's strange loops here. Consciousness trying to grasp consciousness is like a hand trying to grasp itself. It can make the physical gesture, but it can never actually complete the action.
Wow. So when the author stepped back from that window, they heard a very specific kind of silence in their mind. The silence of having no internal witness.
And that leads to the 3 a.m. moment we talked about at the beginning. Fast forward a few weeks from the window incident.
Right. They've been having smaller episodes, but they're still going through the motions, and then they wake up. The physical reality of the room is perfectly intact, but the I who owned the room is missing.
The nervous system is running, perception is happening, breathing is happening. But the owner simply didn't arrive.
It's an empty, ownerless terror. And from that night onward, the fragmentation becomes incredibly pervasive.
Those 4 integrated components of the self began to violently sever.
Let's unpack what that actually felt like, starting with the narrative blankness.
Sure. If a coworker asks you a friendly question about your childhood, you naturally pull up a memory and tell the story.
Right, you feel a connection to it.
But for the author, they found themselves staring at a collection of disconnected images with 0 emotional resonance. They could mechanically assemble the facts of their past to answer the question, but the experience was entirely archaeological.
Archaeological, that's a great word for it.
They were staring at the relics of a stranger's life, piecing together a timeline that felt completely unattached to the body, actually speaking the words.
And then the embodied self starts doing this profound depersonalization. The text calls it a puppet feeling.
Yes. Imagine you were walking down the street, but suddenly the camera angle of your perspective moves.
Like a video game.
Exactly. You are watching yourself walk from slightly above or behind. You are executing the movements perfectly, navigating the sidewalks, stopping at crosswalks. You are a very good puppet.
But the fundamental sense of being the agent generating your own movement is just gone.
It's terrifying. But honestly, the breakdown of the relational self sounds like the most agonizing part of the entire ordeal.
The painful isolation?
Right. The world lost its reality density. It became a thin stage set. Looking at the face of someone you deeply love and seeing a hollow, mechanical performance, that creates a terrible, highly specific kind of isolation.
Even though the author was still performing their end of the social contract perfectly.
Right, they were smiling, nodding, saying the appropriate things. The human biological system can run incredibly well on autopilot, even when no one is home in the control room.
But the subtle, invisible confirmation of existence that we normally exchange with other people just bounced right off them.
It didn't penetrate at all.
So you find yourself completely alone, unable to communicate an experience that is essentially the breakdown of communication itself. And that absolute isolation is exactly why the author had to seek out something entirely different to survive.
Which brings us to ameti.
Yes, the Japanese concept mentioned in the text, which I found fascinating because it completely bypasses our Western instinct to talk through or try to fix a psychological crisis.
Ame refers to a kind of trusting abandon, a deep, primal need to be held and accepted without conditions. The author realized that the people who helped the most during this severe dissolution weren't the ones trying to logically dissect the problem or offer solutions.
Right, the fixers didn't help.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The people who helped were simply reliably present. They didn't flinch from the strangeness of what the author was going through. They offered a steady, silent, physical witness that the world was still solid.
Just sitting in the room and allowing the author to simply broken without demanding they perform being okay.
Exactly.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting to me. The language problem. The manuscript details how the very fabric of language began to dissolve.
Because if you are a creature of language, you trust words to anchor you.
Right. But for the author, words became arbitrary sounds. Grammar felt like a bizarre, unnatural imposition on a world that didn't actually contain subjects and objects.
And the biggest problem was pronouns.
The loss of the deictic center.
Right. Deixis refers to the words that anchor language to a specific perspective in space and time. Here literally means the physical location of the speaker. I means the consciousness speaking.
But when the self dissolves, that fundamental anchor vanishes. Imagine trying to order a coffee or text your partner without genuinely feeling the word I or here or now.
The author started noticing the word I, the way you notice a word if you repeat it out loud 50 times.
Until it strips away all meaning and just sounds like animal grunts.
Exactly. They had to start using I merely as a technical tool, a grammatical convenience required to survive social interactions so people wouldn't look at them strangely. It was no longer a lived reality.
They even found themselves inferring their own emotional states based on their physical reactions rather than experiencing those emotions directly.
Which leads us straight into what the text calls the structure of emptiness.
Right, the Buddhist concept of sunyata, the idea that all things lack inherent independent existence.
Now, in a spiritual context, arriving at that realization is often framed as the ultimate liberation, an opening into profound freedom.
But that's when it's chosen, right?
Exactly. When it is approached gradually, within a chosen, supportive context full of teachers and a sturdy philosophical framework, seeing that the self is empty can indeed bring immense ease.
But the author experienced an unchosen sunyata.
All right. It arrived violently and uninvited, right in the middle of an ordinary life. The analogy the author provides is striking.
For the quantum space analogy?
Yes. Intellectually, we all know that the human body is mostly made of empty quantum space and probability clouds. We accept the physics of it.
But if you were suddenly forced to directly experience your physical form as a shifting probability cloud while trying to walk down a busy sidewalk,
It wouldn't feel liberating. It would be entirely annihilating. Truth arriving without a contextual container to hold it is devastating.
it turns an abstract philosophical goal into a literal nightmare. And you see that nightmare play out perfectly in the scene where the author is sitting in a room filled with winter light.
The radical there-ness.
Yes. They describe looking at the dust motes, the old books on the shelf, the furniture, and everything has this intense radical there-ness. It is completely, undeniably present, but it has zero me-forness.
Which is hard to grasp until you think about everyday objects. Think about your favorite mug in your kitchen.
Right, it's not just a ceramic cylinder, it's yours. It holds your memories of morning coffee.
But take away that projection and it's just raw geometry. The world the author saw was dead clean.
Because that projection of meaning, that constant labeling of the world as it relates to us, is actually our participation in reality.
It's the invisible glue that makes the physical world livable. And when that projection completely withdraws, you enter what the author refers to as the dark night.
Where the world became phenomenologically transparent.
Exactly. They could literally see through objects, through the social masks of loved ones, straight to the impersonal void hovering at the margins of everything.
Confronted with the sheer, indifferent physical there-ness of the universe. And it's crucial to distinguish that this void isn't just severe clinical depression.
Right, the manuscript is very clear on that. It wasn't the feeling that the self was inherently bad or worthless, which is the heavy narrative of depression.
It was the terrifying, cold realization that the self is fundamentally contingent and unnecessary.
The manuscript references the philosopher Martin Heidegger and his concept of angst to explain this.
How is angst different from ordinary fear?
Well, fear always has a specific object. You are afraid of a bear in the woods, or of losing your job, or of getting sick. Angst is a pervasive dread about nothing in particular. It's an anxiety regarding the sheer, inescapable fact of existence itself.
Just the weight of being alive.
Right. Heidegger argued that angst strips away what he called Das Man, the they-self, which is our comfortable, anonymous social conformity.
But the author notes that their dissolution went much further than Heidegger's map, didn't they?
They did. It didn't just strip away the superficial social self. It stripped away the core, authentic self right along with it, leaving absolutely nothing to stand on.
So how do you keep going? When the floor has entirely vanished and every object in your house looks like a transparent shell over a void.
According to the text, there was eventually a shift in the weather. The fundamental groundlessness didn't magically go away, but it stopped being an enemy to fight against.
This brings in the Buddhist parable of the second arrow.
Yes. The first arrow is the unavoidable pain of existence. In this specific case, the terrifying groundlessness and the fragmentation of the mind.
And the second arrow.
The second arrow is the entirely optional suffering we add to the first arrow by resisting it. It's the constant internal monologue of, this shouldn't be happening to me, or I must fix this and get back to normal.
And the author eventually just stopped firing the second arrow.
But not because they achieved some grand, noble state of spiritual acceptance. They were simply exhausted. The massive amount of cognitive energy required to constantly file that second arrow of resistance just ran out.
And when the resistance collapsed, the groundlessness simply became a chronic condition, like living with a low-grade fever.
Right. And once that resistance drops, a space opens up where navigation becomes possible.
And the manuscript is incredibly generous in outlining exactly what failed during this period and what actually provided a lifeline.
Let's talk about what failed first. You'd think the logical step for a highly analytical person would be to think your way out of it, to use cognitive analysis.
The author basically says that is like trying to describe a flood by drinking the water. The tool of thought is what's broken, so using it just accelerates the drowning.
Exactly. Even well-meaning friends trying to logically fix the problem backfired because it just reinforced the terrifying idea that the author was fundamentally broken.
And there is a massive warning regarding consciousness-altering substances, too.
Oh, absolutely. Do not add chemical catalysts to an already highly destabilized system.
So what did work?
The things that provided a lifeline were surprisingly primitive and grounded. The body became the primary anchor, specifically the act of walking.
Because walking requires no self.
Right. It's a proprioceptive miracle that runs almost entirely on automatic pilot. You don't need an intact narrative self to put one foot in front of the other. The body just executes the movement, and the rhythm proves that something is still happening in the world.
Water also became a vital tool. The author relied heavily on showers and baths.
Because they provided a cutaneous boundary.
I really related to this part. Think about when you take a really hot shower after a chaotic, stressful day. It brings your awareness entirely to the surface of your skin.
Yes, for the author, the sharp physical sensation of water confirmed the outer edges of their body when their interior felt like an infinite dissolved void.
They also relied on rigid structure, eating regular meals, enforcing regular sleep patterns, building a heavy external scaffold to hold the days together when the internal scaffold had completely collapsed.
And we talked about Omi earlier, the silent physical presence of other human bodies in a room. Just breathing and existing without demanding conversation offered a huge anchoring comfort.
And finally, there was writing. But not analytical, interpretive writing, trying to solve the crisis.
Just pure phenomenological description, writing down, this is what the light looks like right now, without demanding that it mean anything. The page became a safe substitute for the missing internal witness.
So slowly, leaning heavily on those practical tools, the author entered a phase of reintegration. But it's crucial to understand the endpoint here.
They didn't return to exactly who they were before the window incident. The old foundation was gone.
Nor did they become some perfectly enlightened, floating spiritual master. They returned as what the manuscript calls an approximate self.
An approximate self. So what does that actually look like when you have to go buy groceries or answer emails?
It means the narrative self, that voice in your head, came back online, but now it is permanently recognized as a narrative. The story is just a story, no longer mistaken for the absolute bedrock of reality.
Deeply held opinions are held much more loosely.
And this is perhaps the most practical takeaway for me. Emotions shift from nouns to verbs. Instead of saying, I am sad, which locks the emotion into your core identity, the experience becomes, sadness is here.
Which is just a temporary passing event in the space of awareness. It's the experience of having a self, but holding it incredibly lightly.
This profound shift really raises a critical tension in how we map these kinds of extreme human experiences.
It does. The author explicitly contrasts two dueling frameworks, the clinical map and the traditional map.
Let's break those down.
Sure. The clinical framework, your standard psychiatric model, looks at its experience from the outside and sees a cluster of severe disorders: depersonalization, derealization, dissociative episodes. It sees pathological symptoms that desperately need to be cured so normal baseline functioning can return.
And the traditional map.
Drawn from various spiritual, mystical, and contemplative maps, it looks at ordinary selfhood as a severe limitation. It views the dissolution of that self as a difficult but necessary passage to ultimate liberation or awakening.
And the genius of the manuscript is the argument that if you aggressively apply only the clinical map, you might survive the acute terror, but you completely foreclose the possibility that this massive suffering could actually mean something.
That it could be a passage to a deeper truth about human consciousness.
Exactly. But on the flip side, if you exclusively use the traditional spiritual map, you risk romanticizing a genuinely dangerous psychological crisis.
Ignoring the desperate need for practical, stabilizing help like sleep and structure.
The author realized they needed both clinical, grounded support to physically survive the crisis, and traditional frameworks to weave the fragmented pieces into a new context.
Because meaning isn't something you just stumble across sitting under a rock. Meaning is actively made from the raw material of experience.
The author had to forge meaning out of the absolute rubble of their own identity. They integrated the terrifying truth that the self is an elaborate, fragile construct, and used that knowledge to build a lighter, more permeable way of moving through the world.
They didn't achieve a permanent state of blissful enlightenment, but they gained a profound, unflinching honesty about the nature of experience itself.
It's a truly incredible journey to follow. The Dissolution Manuscript gives us this raw, deeply honest look at the terrifying permeability of our own identities. It's a stark reminder that the solid floor we all think we are standing on is actively constructed by our brains moment to moment.
And knowing that, we should probably be a lot more gentle with ourselves and with everyone around us because we are all maintaining that delicate illusion together.
Ultimately, the author points past all the fragmentation to the undeniable fact of experience itself. The pure, bare awareness that somehow remains shining even when the life story, the sense of body, and the social relationships are entirely stripped away.
It really makes you wonder about the structures we build to catch each other when that illusion fails.
It does.
The author briefly points to the philosopher Simone Weil and her concept of pure attention held within a framework of profound love. And I want to leave you with this thought to mull over.
Go for it.
Think about this for a moment. If the exact same neurological or phenomenological event, the total terrifying loss of the self, the dropping of the floor, can be experienced as either an annihilating dark night of the soul or a transcendent spiritual awakening,
Right.
then perhaps the core difference isn't in the raw experience itself. Perhaps it all comes down to the cultural, relational, and emotional container you happen to be held in at the exact moment your reality fractures.
That is a staggering thought.
If that's true, how much of what we confidently label as mental illness versus enlightenment is just a matter of who happens to be sitting in the room with us when the floor drops?
That reframes everything. So, for everyone listening, think about the people in your life. If the floor dropped out from under them tomorrow, are you the kind of container that would frantically try to fix their reality back to normal? Or are you the kind of container where they could safely fall apart and still be seen? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you and the self within you.